My husband and I got married during the pandemic in New Zealand, which meant we couldn't have the wedding we'd hoped for with all our friends and family. Still, we wanted our wedding night to feel special. So we booked a small Airbnb near the harbor, not too far from our home. The place was cozy, a tiny house tucked behind someone else's property, right by a forest. It had just one room, along with a bathroom and small kitchen. We had dinner, unpacked, and spent some time just unwinding. Later that evening, while my husband was brushing his teeth, I began tidying up. That's when I opened one of the drawers under the bed and noticed something unusual. Inside was a red-covered notebook. At first, I assumed it was a welcome book from the host, but when I opened it, I quickly realized it was something else. It was a guest journal filled with notes from previous visitors. The first few entries were normal, with people writing nice comments about their stay. But as I kept flipping through, the tone changed, becoming strange and unsettling. One note read, "Something knocked on the window at 3 a.m., but no one was there." Another said, "We had the feeling someone was watching us all night." Then there was a longer message, "We tried to leave, but the car wouldn't start. If you're reading this, don't stay past midnight." Just then, my husband came out of the bathroom. I looked up and said, "There's something strange in this book." He sat beside me, and we kept reading together. Many of the pages had thick black lines covering the writing, like someone had tried to block out the words. My husband pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it behind one of the crossed-out pages. We could faintly make out the hidden message, and what we saw chilled us. That's when we heard footsteps outside, slowly approaching the house. Then we heard someone quietly unlock the front door. A man's voice called out, "Just checking in. Everything okay?" But it wasn't the host, it was someone we didn't recognize. Looking through the keyhole of the bedroom door, I saw a man wearing gloves and a dark jacket. He calmly placed a small black bag on the table and started pulling things out of it. My husband grabbed my arm and pointed to the small bathroom window. It was tiny, but it was the only way out. We quietly climbed onto the sink and pushed the window open. We squeezed through and dropped to the ground outside, then ran straight into the forest. Eventually, we found a road and flagged down the first vehicle we saw, a delivery van. We begged the driver to take us somewhere safe. He drove us to the closest police station, where we told them everything. The police went to investigate the Airbnb but said nothing seemed out of the ordinary. When they spoke to the host, she claimed no one else had access to the property. We told them about the red notebook. They searched the whole place again, but couldn't find it. It was gone, as if it had never existed. Weeks later, we tried to find the Airbnb listing online, but it had vanished. Not just the listing, the host's entire profile had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Since then, I've never stayed at a new place without reading all the recent reviews and double-checking every detail of the property. My name's Daniel, and last October I booked an Airbnb that turned into an experience I'll never forget. Things went south quickly, and honestly, I'm lucky I made it out. I'd been drowning in my tech job for months, just endless screens, non-stop deadlines, and no real rest. The pressure was non-stop. One morning, after snapping at a coworker, I realized I was at a breaking point. I hadn't taken a proper vacation in over a year, and my body was begging for a break. So I decided to find somewhere quiet and secluded through Airbnb. Nothing fancy, just a peaceful place in nature to clear my head. After browsing for a while, I came across a listing for a small cabin described as a private escape. It was exactly 2 hours from my apartment in the city. The photos looked nice. It had all the basics, a kitchen, one bedroom, a living room, and a hallway connecting the rooms. Most importantly, it was remote. No neighbors, no distractions, no stress. The host's name was Martin. His reviews were glowing. Everyone mentioned how calm and easy the place was, but something caught my attention. A few guests specifically pointed out the house rules with comments like, just follow Martin's rules and you'll be fine. It struck me as odd, but I assumed people were just being overly cautious. Curious, I double-checked the house rules. No smoking, no pets, no parties, nothing strange. So I brushed off the weird vibes and booked it. On check-in day, just a few hours before I left, I got a brief message from Martin. Please make sure you follow these 2 house rules during your stay. Don't unplug the lamp in the kitchen. Don't open the basement door, even if you hear anything. I was thrown off. Why hadn't he included that earlier? I showed the message to my friend Jake. He laughed and said, "You're overthinking it. Probably some busted wiring or something he doesn't want you messing with. Cabins are weird like that. Just chill." Still feeling a little uneasy, I packed my stuff and headed out. The drive was smooth and quiet. About halfway through, I lost phone signal, not surprising for somewhere remote. Eventually, I arrived. The cabin looked just like the photos, modest structure, a small porch, thick trees pressing in from all sides. I used the code Martin had sent, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was cozy. I felt instantly calmer, until I walked into the kitchen and saw the lamp. It was plugged in, giving off a dull yellow glow that barely lit the room. It looked old, but harmless. Still, Martin's warning about it lingered in my mind. I let it go, dropped my bags in the bedroom, and explored the rest of the cabin. The bathroom across the hall was small but tidy. Then I saw the door in the hallway, worn out, with peeling paint and a silver padlock. Clearly, the basement. Just seeing it sent a chill down my spine. I did my best to ignore it. Made some dinner, unpacked, tried to settle in, but the feeling that something was off wouldn't go away. Night fell fast. With no phone signal or Wi-Fi, the place started to feel more and more cut off. Around midnight, I heard a soft thumping sound coming from the hallway. I froze. Slow, steady knocks, coming from behind the locked basement door. Heart racing, I walked toward the hallway. The padlock was still there, secure. Remembering Martin's rule, I didn't touch it. Instead, I locked myself in the bedroom and stayed there all night. I barely slept. In the morning, I debated just leaving. But part of me felt silly, running away because of a few noises. I made coffee and tried to shake it off. That's when things got even weirder. The overhead light flickered, and the kitchen lamp briefly glowed brighter than before, then dimmed again. It freaked me out. I stepped outside to try and find a signal. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, I heard someone calling my name. The voice was eerily familiar, identical to mine. Panicked, I ran back inside. That's when I noticed the basement padlock was gone. Not unlocked, gone. No sign of it anywhere. Terrified, I grabbed my stuff and tried to leave. But the car wouldn't start. I stepped out, hoping to catch a signal or flag someone down. That's when I saw it, at the edge of the woods. Someone was standing there. Wearing my clothes. My jacket. My jeans. My shoes. Something was seriously wrong. I ran back inside, slammed the door, and jammed a chair under the knob. I stayed up, too scared to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, then knocking on the bedroom window. I got up the courage to step outside and look, but no one was there. The next morning, there was a small box sitting on the porch. Inside was a note. "Go down, or I come in now." The basement door was wide open. The lamp was off. The whole house felt different. I took a breath and stepped down the stairs, one at a time. At the bottom stood the figure from the woods. Same face. Same clothes. Just staring. Waiting. I ran. I didn't even look back. I sprinted up the stairs, flew out the front door, and ran blindly into the forest. I could hear it behind me, chasing, but I never stopped. I hid behind a fallen tree and stayed silent. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. When I finally made it back, the car started without a problem. I left without looking back. Later that day, I noticed a new review under my Airbnb account, one I never wrote. Left a bit early, but next time I'll stay longer. About a year ago, life had gotten overwhelming for my family. My husband, Mark, was working long hours, often coming home completely drained. Our daughter, Emma, had just finished college and was feeling uncertain about her future. As for me, I was constantly exhausted, doing my best to keep everyone grounded. We all needed a serious break from city life and our everyday routines. One evening, Emma sat next to me while I was browsing Airbnb listings on my phone. I clicked on one that stood out. It was an old ranch house in New Mexico, far from any busy towns. The listing mentioned it was the original home of a ranch that once stretched across miles of land. "Check this out," I said, showing Emma. "Old ranch house. Quiet. Peaceful. Might be good for all of us." She looked through the pictures and shrugged. "Kinda creepy," she said. I laughed. Later that night, Mark looked over the photos and thought it sounded perfect. Within a few days, we had packed up and hit the road, excited for a little family time. When we arrived, the house looked exactly like the listing. Old, but well cared for. It sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, far off the main road. Flat, dry fields surrounded us, with distant mountains on the horizon. It was remote, and that was just what we wanted. Inside, the house was tidy, though clearly aged. For the first time in a while, everyone seemed at ease. After dinner, we spent the evening laughing and playing cards together. Mark passed out almost immediately that night, but I stayed up reading in bed. I was just starting to feel drowsy when suddenly I felt two cold hands under the blanket, lightly grabbing and tickling my feet. I jerked my feet back and sat up quickly. "Emma, cut it out," I whispered, expecting her to be crouched at the end of the bed. But the room was empty. Completely still, except for the sound of Mark snoring beside me. I glanced at the open bedroom door. Across the hall, Emma's bedroom door was firmly shut. There was no way she could have slipped back into her room without me seeing her. I got up, opened her door. She was fast asleep. I stood there for a moment, confused, then went back to bed. I left the lamp on, pulled the covers around me tightly, and barely slept that night. In the morning, I decided not to bring it up. We spent the day exploring town, browsing little shops and grabbing coffee. Things felt normal again, until we returned to the house that evening. Emma offered to cook dinner, and Mark joined her in the kitchen. I sat in the living room nearby, watching them joke and chop vegetables. Then, suddenly, a dark figure walked calmly through the open space between me and the kitchen. It didn't stop. It didn't turn. It just walked straight across and vanished into the solid wall. I sat there, frozen. The next day, things only got more unsettling. Emma seemed distracted, on edge. At one point, I caught her standing in the hallway, staring at an old painting of barns and horses. "Was there always a man in this picture?" she asked. Sure enough, near one of the barns, there was now a faint figure of a man in the background. I had never noticed him before. "I don't remember him being there," Emma whispered. That evening, while Mark was outside taking a phone call, Emma pulled me aside. "I know this sounds weird," she said quietly, "but last night I kept waking up because I thought I heard whispering in the hallway. At first, I assumed it was you or Dad, but when I checked, you were both asleep." I didn't laugh. I didn't brush it off. I told her everything, the freezing hands, the shadow that passed through the living room. Her face turned pale. "So it wasn't just me," she whispered. "We decided not to tell Mark. He'd just think we were overreacting." That night, Emma moved her bedding to the living room couch. She didn't want to sleep alone again. The next morning, Mark left to explore town by himself. Emma and I stayed back, still feeling uneasy. Driven by nerves and curiosity, we started quietly inspecting the house more closely. Down the hall, near Emma's room, was a closet door that looked just slightly different than the others, like someone had repainted it recently. We opened it. Inside was a mostly empty storage closet, some shelves and a few cleaning items. But one thing stood out. At the back of the closet was a wooden panel that looked newer than everything else. Emma knelt down. "Mom, should we open it?" I didn't want to, but I nodded. She gently tugged on it, and the panel swung open, revealing a narrow crawl space. Right at the edge sat a worn, stuffed rabbit. Old and tattered, clearly once a child's toy. Emma reached toward it instinctively, but I stopped her. "Don't touch it," I said firmly, and told her to close the panel. We barely spoke for the rest of the day. When Mark returned, cheerful and unaware of our mood, we kept up appearances. We didn't tell him a thing. That night, around 2 a.m., we heard soft movement outside our bedroom door. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped right in front of the door. Then, one quiet knock. We stayed still. Completely silent. My heart raced. After a few minutes, the footsteps drifted away. We didn't sleep after that. "Do you think it wanted us to find that closet?" Emma asked softly the next morning. I paused. "I don't know. We still don't fully understand what that place was. Maybe, it didn't mean harm. But strangely, we've talked about going back someday. Maybe just to understand it. To face whatever it was. Only next time, we won't pretend it wasn't real." I want to tell you about something really strange that happened to me. It was one night around 11:30 p.m., and I was driving home. The roads were mostly empty and quiet, pretty typical for where I live. Up ahead, I noticed a police car pulled off to the side with its lights flashing. There was also another car completely stopped right in the middle of the road. Even from a distance, the scene made me feel uneasy. At first, I assumed it was just a car accident, and I braced myself, thinking I might see something disturbing. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't that at all. My heart started to race, and a real sense of nervousness came over me, more intense than anything I usually felt. As I approached, I saw the police officer standing beside his car. He was speaking loudly to the driver of the vehicle that had stopped in the road. The driver looked really distressed and was shouting, "It was already like this when I got here. I swear, I didn't do anything. I didn't hit anything." The officer was responding, but I couldn't hear him clearly from where I was. Then he turned his flashlight towards something lying on the road in the same direction both he and the driver were looking. I slowed down more and rolled down my window to get a better sense of what was going on and whether it was safe to pass. That's when I saw what they were both staring at. In the middle of the road, just across the lane, was a deer. But it wasn't lying down like you'd expect. It was sitting in this really bizarre position, almost like someone had carefully arranged it. Its legs were twisted and crossed in a way that didn't seem natural at all. As I drove up slowly, trying to edge past, I ended up locking eyes with the deer. And when I say eye contact, I mean it felt intense. The deer's eyes didn't look normal. They weren't those usual glossy black eyes that reflect light. Instead, they looked like deep black voids. Empty. Hollow. Almost too large. Its head was tilted down slightly, but the eyes were staring up at me, directly into me. The way it looked at me made me freeze. I couldn't move or look away for a few seconds. I've never felt anything quite like it. I rolled the window up as fast as I could. I was so close to it, I could have reached out and touched it. As I passed the deer, it felt like everything slowed down. My reactions, my sense of time, everything felt off. When I finally got home, the whole thing kept running through my head. I started searching online to see if there was anything that could explain what I'd seen. I read about diseases that can affect deer and make them act strangely. One of them was called chronic wasting disease, and apparently it can cause deer to behave in odd, even zombie-like ways, staggering around, looking confused or unaware. But the deer I saw didn't quite match the descriptions. It wasn't moving at all, it was too still, too intentional. Even after all the research, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else going on. Something beyond a simple disease. Something I still can't quite explain. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The place was super cheap, so I wasn't expecting a luxury stay. It was just one night, and all I really needed was a bed. Right from the start, though, things were off. My data roaming didn't work at all in that country, which was a nightmare. I ended up logging into a cafe's Wi-Fi to plan my route ahead of time as best I could. Somehow, I managed to find the place on time. I rang the only doorbell and waited. Nobody answered. I rang again and again, waited about 5 minutes. Then I noticed the door had a mail slot. I looked through it, and what I saw honestly startled me. Inside, it looked more like an abandoned barn than someone's home. There was a dusty couch right in front of the entrance, furniture draped in cloth, everything covered in grime and looking ancient. I normally like old houses, but this didn't seem like one prepared for guests. It didn't even look lived in. I stood there, confused, wondering if I had the wrong house, until an extremely old, scruffy-looking man walked up from the street. I asked if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he muttered something I hoped was a yes. So I asked, "Are you Tim, the host?" He nodded and unlocked the door. I already described the entrance, but the main feature was this ancient, creaky staircase leading upstairs. I followed him, trying not to gag from the smell. He reeked of cigarettes and coughed the whole way. Not ideal, but fine. Upstairs was just as strange. It was pitch dark, furniture stacked and hidden under sheets, and random items scattered around. There was one creepy curtain I couldn't see behind that gave me an awful feeling. Then we went up another staircase to reach what he said was my hallway, which was somehow even worse. The walls were cracked, with old religious paintings and crosses hanging beside them. It seriously looked like a horror movie set. I'm kind of goth, so I don't usually mind dark vibes, but this didn't feel aesthetic, it felt neglected. Like creepy in a way that wasn't meant to be. He showed me the bathroom, which had a gaping hole in the bathtub tile and part of the wall. Everything was dirty. Then he took me to my room, which was actually okay, aside from the shelves full of old, unsettling dolls. The bed looked fine, though. I asked if they had Wi-Fi. He said no. That sucked, because it meant I had zero way to reach anyone from inside the house. I asked what time checkout was the next day, and he just said, "Doesn't matter." Then he slowly climbed up to the 4th floor, which was completely pitch black. Something about that really freaked me out. I had no interest in showering there, so I just changed clothes and charged my phone. That's when I noticed the creepiest part: there were no locks. Not on the bathroom. Not on my bedroom door. Even worse, the bathroom was full of half-used products, like someone had just been there, shampoo, toothpaste, even a lash curler lying around. It wasn't like, "Here's a few things for your convenience." It was more like someone left all their stuff and nobody cleaned it up. That's when I decided, I'm not sleeping here. No way. I started imagining every scenario. What if all these things were left behind by other guests who never made it out? Why weren't there any terrible reviews? I debated whether I should take all my belongings to the concert with me. It didn't feel remotely safe, but my back was killing me from my heavy bag, so I packed just my essentials. Before leaving, I slid a folded piece of paper under the door so I'd know if someone opened it while I was gone. As I walked down the stairs, I heard a key turning in the front door. I figured maybe it was the wife or girlfriend the listing had mentioned. But a totally different middle-aged man came in. He looked at me and said, "Hey, I'm Tim." And all I could think was, who the hell was the other guy? I was internally screaming, but kept it together and made small talk before leaving. I was so rattled. Thankfully, I made it to the concert on time. It was amazing and honestly worth everything. But afterward, I was beyond exhausted and knew I couldn't stay up all night. I found a nearby hostel. It wasn't spotless, but at least it had Wi-Fi, a decent shower, and a locking door. The next morning, I got kicked out at 10 a.m., so I headed back to get the rest of my stuff. Out of curiosity, I peeked through the mail slot again, and nearly jumped. The old guy was passed out, snoring on the same couch, just inches from the door. I quietly opened the door and slipped past him, praying he wouldn't wake up. My room hadn't been touched. I grabbed everything and got out of there fast. I don't know if I overreacted, but between the two Tims, the lack of locks, and the vague "checkout doesn't matter" comment, if I had imagined the worst, this setup would have been perfect for something terrible. At best, nothing would have happened and I'd just lie awake in panic all night. I usually love traveling solo, but this whole experience was a little too much. If I remember correctly, this happened sometime around January or February 2024. I was visiting family in the south of France, but for personal reasons I won't get into, I didn't want to stay at their place, though they did offer. I tend to visit them fairly often and usually make plans last minute, so I never booked the same accommodation twice. Sometimes I go for hotel rooms even though they cost more, simply because I prefer being by myself rather than socializing with hosts. Even when I rent through Airbnb, I specifically look for studio apartments or small flats where I don't have to share space. Having my own private area is a big priority for me. This time, I found a listing within walking distance of where my family lives. The photos made it look really nice, and I think it was described as either a small house or a ground-level flat with a yard and access to a garden. I'm pretty sure it was one of the more budget-friendly options, but that didn't matter too much to me since I wasn't there for a vacation. I just needed something practical, and I wasn't looking to spend extra for luxury. There weren't many reviews, but the few that were there seemed decent. So I showed up with my suitcase and waited outside the property. I messaged the host, who was supposed to hand me the keys, but he was running late. I ended up standing out front for over an hour, trying to stay patient and reminding myself that at least the area looked nice and relatively safe, even if the walk there took me through some sketchier parts. Eventually, the host showed up. He seemed like a nice enough guy and was very apologetic, saying he'd been in another town visiting friends or family and lost track of time. That's when the first red flag popped up. He mentioned they'd been drinking and he didn't have time to sober up, so he had to speed on the highway on his motorbike while still tipsy. He even joked that I shouldn't mention that in the review. I gave him a serious look and said he probably shouldn't be driving in that state, but he shrugged it off, insisting he didn't want to keep me waiting. I told him I wouldn't bring it up in the review, though I definitely did later, but I didn't want to start things off on a bad note. Despite all that, he was very friendly, talkative, and seemed genuine. I was just relieved to finally get in and drop my stuff. Then came the second red flag. He told me the space I'd rented was a small apartment next to the main house where he lived. He assured me I'd have my own entrance, bathroom, kitchen, and so on. I wasn't thrilled by that setup, but a small part of me thought it might actually be safer not being completely alone on a ground floor, just in case anything happened. He gave me a little tour, and everything seemed okay, old, but I hadn't been expecting anything fancy. The flat was on a level lower than the street, not quite a basement since it still had a garden entrance, but you had to walk down some steps through the backyard to get in. I really noticed this from the bedroom window, where the ground outside was clearly higher. Then came the next yellow flag. He pointed out a door near the bedroom that connected my space to his house. I had half expected something like that, but I thought he'd only be able to get in by crossing the yard. He told me the door stayed locked and not to worry about it. It didn't come off as a warning, more like a casual, "You'll see this door, it doesn't concern you." We chatted a bit longer than I would have liked. I was tired and still annoyed about the wait, and he gave me his phone number, saying the Airbnb messaging feature wasn't great and that texting on WhatsApp would be easier. Then he left. I started settling in, unpacked, got changed, and headed out to see my family. Later that evening, when I got back, I decided to shower. I think what happened next took place before that, because I remember locking the bathroom door, which I never do when I know I'm alone, and feeling unusually on edge during the shower. The biggest red flag happened then. I was sitting on the bed when I suddenly heard a knock and someone saying my name. Before I had time to react, I heard a key turning in a lock and the sound of a door opening. It was the connecting door right next to the bedroom. The host walked in, saying he couldn't find his phone and thought he might have left it in my flat. I was stunned. If he'd come in just 10 minutes later, I might have been getting out of the shower or walking around in a towel. I tried to stay polite and told him I hadn't seen a phone. It was obvious there wasn't much in the room aside from my open suitcase and some personal stuff. Still, he came in, talking a mile a minute, not really giving me time to ask him to leave. He looked around, didn't find the phone, apologized, made some small talk about whether I'd eaten dinner, and then left. At that point, I seriously debated whether I should stay. I knew canceling meant I'd probably lose the night's payment since it was so late. And I'd booked at least 4 nights, so I didn't want to lose even more money. I quickly checked hotel availability, but everything was either full or couldn't be booked last minute. So I decided to take a super fast shower, worried the whole time that he might come back for some other forgotten item. I rushed to get dressed and sat on the bed, deep in thought. I convinced myself I'd just get through one night and reassess in the morning. That's when I noticed something that freaked me out even more. There were 2 chairs in the bedroom, and one of them had ropes tied around the armrests. The chairs weren't broken, and the ropes weren't securing anything, they were just loosely wrapped, and I still have no idea why. Still, I decided I'd sleep there that night and tried to use a chair to block the door handle like in the movies. But, spoiler alert, that doesn't really work in real life. I tried both chairs, stacking them, even messing with the ropes to make some kind of barrier, but the handle still moved enough to open the door easily. I figured if I at least left them in front of the door, I might hear something if someone tried to get in. But the door opened outward anyway, so it was mostly pointless. Even if I heard something, I had no plan for what I'd actually do. It was clear I was anxious and overthinking, but I live alone in a foreign country, and I've made it a rule to always prioritize my safety. I don't take risks, I won't get drunk around people I don't trust, and I'll always call a cab if I feel unsafe walking home. The city I live in is generally safe, but like many women, I've had more than a few bad experiences. So from the outside, this might just sound like a story about a nice host who's a little too friendly, a missing phone, and some random rope on a chair. But to my overly cautious, anxious self, it felt like the start of a horror film where you're yelling at the screen for the main character to leave before it's too late. That's why, around midnight, I called my brother and asked him to pick me up. I ended up spending the rest of my trip at his place. So my boyfriend, his best friend, and his best friend's girlfriend all drove up to Big Bear on June 26th. The next day, another one of our friends came up on the 27th. Since there were only 2 bedrooms, he was going to sleep downstairs. That first night, things already felt a little eerie. The cabin was pretty isolated, and there weren't any outdoor lights. It's deep in the woods, with coyotes howling in the distance and the occasional bear wandering through. Still, that's all pretty normal for the area. On the night of the 27th, around midnight, my boyfriend and I were in bed when the friend who was staying downstairs suddenly came pounding on our door. He was clearly panicked, saying he'd seen figures moving in the trees and that the motion sensor light had gone on. He also heard loud footsteps outside. We were all a bit shaken, but my boyfriend got up, checked the cabin inside and out, and didn't find anything. We all went upstairs to the other couple's room, which had a porch and a sliding glass door that faced the forest. For some context, I'm naturally a very anxious person. I tend to overthink and assume the worst, whereas my boyfriend is extremely calm and rational. He keeps me grounded. My boyfriend decided to check the last area we hadn't looked yet. He pulled back the curtain and suddenly jumped and said, "Oh no." I froze. Seeing someone as solid and composed as him react like that was horrifying. He locked the door right away and slowly stepped back. Then he whispered that there was a tall man standing in the trees, just watching us. Not moving, just staring. At first, I thought he was messing with me, but then he looked me in the eyes and told me to lock the door right now. That's when I realized he wasn't joking. Everyone started to panic. I ran to lock the door behind us, and we all decided to stay in that room together to keep an eye out. It was the middle of summer and incredibly hot, but none of us were willing to open a window. I tried not to show how scared I was, especially once everyone else seemed to settle down a little. About half an hour went by and nothing else happened. It started to feel cramped, 5 people in one small room, and 3 of them were guys. So my boyfriend and I went back to our room. I was still really on edge, and he tried to distract me, help me calm down. By now, it was around 1:30 a.m. I told him I was too freaked out to turn off the lights, and he said that was totally fine, we could leave them on. I finally started to drift off, and then there was a loud bang. I sat up immediately, and he looked at me, just as suddenly, the power went out. Total darkness. I started crying and shaking, I couldn't see anything. I tried to jump out of bed but got caught in the sheets and fell. My boyfriend helped me up, and we grabbed our phones and ran to the room where everyone else was. I was full on panicking by then. I tried to contact the Airbnb host, but nothing was sending. I tried calling my dad, but none of our phones had service. We felt completely cut off. Luckily, the friend who came up after us had a different phone carrier, and his phone showed 1 bar. He managed to call the local sheriff. Looking back now, it might have been a bit dramatic, but in the moment, we honestly felt like we were in real danger. While he was on the phone, they transferred us to the utility company. We gave them our location, but they said the cabin was too remote, they didn't even service that area. At this point, we weren't sure if the outage affected the whole area or if that man outside had somehow cut the power. We ended up calling 911 to report the strange activity and the blackout. They sent out the fire department. A few hours later, around 3 a.m., the power came back on, and we were finally able to get some sleep. The next day, we spoke to some locals and mentioned the outage. One of them said that was really unusual, it shouldn't have happened. He said the only time the power goes out around there is during a snowstorm, and there obviously hadn't been one. He said he had no explanation for what happened. I was craving a quiet weekend away, just me, alone in a little cabin tucked away in the woods. I really needed to disconnect and recharge. While browsing Airbnb, I came across what seemed like the perfect spot, a cozy, charming cabin owned by an older woman named Helen. Her profile photo showed her with a warm smile, and all the reviews said she was welcoming and the cabin was clean and serene. I booked it immediately. The drive was long, but peaceful. As I got closer, the sun was setting, bathing the forest in golden light. When I pulled up to the cabin, it looked exactly like the pictures, maybe even better. There was a wooden porch, and soft, warm light glowing from the window. The whole place had a timeless, old-world charm, with ivy climbing the stone walls and a little porch swing gently swaying in the wind. I used the key code Helen sent, and the door opened with a gentle creak. On the kitchen table, there was a handwritten note from her, wishing me a pleasant stay and apologizing for not being able to greet me in person. That first night was everything I had hoped for. I made myself a cup of tea, curled up by the fireplace with a book, and let the peaceful forest sounds lull me into comfort. The crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of trees outside made it feel so calm. I hadn't felt that relaxed in a long time. I went to bed and fell asleep easily. But the second night, something felt off. I was lying in bed, just about to fall asleep, when I heard a quiet creak. At first, I figured it was just the house settling, but then it happened again. Closer. I stayed completely still, listening. Then came a softer noise, like footsteps on the wood floor. A cold wave of fear moved through me. Another creak, and then a whisper. "Good night." My chest tightened. I quickly looked around the room, but no one was there. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I scanned the room. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed distorted, off. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come. By morning, I decided to pack up and leave early. Something about the place just didn't sit right anymore. I gathered my things and walked into the kitchen to leave Helen a thank you note, and that's when I noticed it. The basement door. Slightly open. I hadn't even realized it was there before. I felt my heart start to race. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I walked over and gently pulled the door open. Stairs led down into darkness. Then the smell hit me, damp, moldy, and something else. Metallic. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I didn't. I stood there, frozen. Then, against better judgment, I turned on my phone's flashlight and slowly started to descend. The basement was small and cluttered, old furniture, boxes, random junk. But there was also a bed. And it wasn't dusty or abandoned, it was tidy. Made. As if someone had been sleeping in it. Beside it was a little table with personal items, a hairbrush, a pair of glasses, a book. It felt like someone was living down here. Then, from behind me, I heard the basement door creak shut. I spun around, ready to bolt back upstairs, and there she was. Helen. At the top of the stairs. But her warm smile was gone. Her face was cold, blank. "You shouldn't have come down here," she said quietly. Her tone calm, but deeply unsettling. I didn't wait. I shoved past her as hard as I could, not daring to look back. I burst through the door and ran straight to my car. Behind me, Helen stood in the doorway, just watching. Her face unreadable. She didn't try to stop me. Just stared, like she knew something I didn't. I jumped in my car, slammed the door, and drove. I didn't slow down, didn't stop, not until I reached the nearest town. I pulled up in front of the police station and ran inside. I told the officers everything. I showed them the Airbnb listing and my reservation. To my relief, they took me seriously and promised to investigate. A few days later, I got a call from the detective handling the case. His voice was grim. Helen wasn't just a sweet host running a peaceful cabin in the woods, she had been harming her guests for years. The basement held evidence linking her to multiple missing people. She had been living down there, waiting for her next visitor. I'm okay now, but I'll never forget the way she looked at me as I drove away. That expression still haunts me. Be careful where you stay. You never know who's watching you sleep.